Okay, so this is the class questions booklet for component 2, and this is question number 3 in the booklet. Go back to question number 1 later date. And to be honest, this is an essay question, and you look at that and you just think, oh, what the, just absolutely looks horrendous, doesn't it? So in this situation, if you've got a pile of data which you've got information that you've clearly got to look at, the thing to do first, I think, here is to look at the question. So, the question says for each type of evidence listed opposite and above. So we've got, let's call it evidence 1. And this will therefore be evidence 2. So that immediately gives you 2 areas for your essay, doesn't it? State whether they provide support for hypothesis 1 or hypothesis 2. So we need to know what those 2 hypotheses are as well. So we need to say, look at evidence 1 and say, right, does it support this or this? Evidence 2, does it support this or this? From this evidence, conclude. So now we've got evidence 1, evidence 2, conclusion. Which hypothesis is more likely, and why a different conclusion may be reached in the future? So our 3 areas then are emerging really clearly, aren't they? We need to consider evidence 1, evidence 2, and then we need to, in our 3rd area, we want to know which is more likely and discuss what might happen in future. So the key to this essay, I think, is thinking about what this means. So tape tails, whalefishes and big nose fish, sorry, what can I say, belong to different families, or they're developmental stages of different species of fish within the same family. So we've got a phylogenetic tree there, so clearly we're going to be talking about classification. So let's have a read of the actual information. Deep regions and nutrient poor habitats. That means there's not a lot of food there. So just doing a bit of annotation. Less food. In order to survive, the fishes that live there have evolved remarkable morphological, so that's what they look like, it's really shape, and life cycle strategies. So this is sort of, reproduction to young. Very few specimens. Quite a few of you commented on this in your essay, and it makes them hard to classify. We've not got very much to go on, is what they're saying. This illustrates the tentative nature of classification. The table provides information. So what information have we got? We've got what depth they're caught. So this one's our odd one out, isn't it? So we've got 0 to 200 or below 1,000, which is this nutrient poor area. We've got 120 of those because they're at the top. We've got 600 of those and 65 of those. We know what size they are. Small, large, medium. These 2 are adults. This is a juvenile. Gender, we don't know. Feeding. So small jaws. Jaws are long. You can open very wide. Don't feed. So, thinking about what we know about classification then. Similar characteristics in the same family. So remember our, this is my sort of, key example. Carnivora. We've got the family of dogs, and we've got the family of cats, and that's what I need to know, really, and a common ancestor. So I'm going to compare everything to there. So here we've got clear morphological differences. So feeding. So what do we know about their morphology? They're all different sizes and they feed differently. So different sizes, feed differently. But the other thing that we know about them is that these are all female, these are all male, and these are all juvenile. And therefore their gender is not known yet. So we've also got our gender. So we've got male, female, male, and not known. So if the females happen to look like this and the males happen to look like this and the juveniles happen to look like that, they could all really be the same thing, couldn't they? So what would this tell us? Hypothesis 1, different families. So this one, just on the morphology, supports hypothesis 1. The fact you've got all these different genders supports hypothesis 2. And then we've got the depth evidence. So the depth evidence would suggest that potentially these are living in the same place, so we've got the same habitat from females and males. So that would support hypothesis 2, that they're actually all developmental stages and the juveniles live at the top and then they'll sort of, sink down as they grow up. Evidence 2. So let's have a look at evidence 2. So back to my family tree. What I know about family trees, dogs and cats. Same order, common ancestry, split into dogs and cats. So everything that's dog-like would be on one branch and everything that's cat-like would be on the other branch. But what have we got here? We've got whalefish, there, 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 and we've got, and there as well, and we've got big nose fish, there, and then we've got tape tails, there. So they sort of seem to be scattered around all over the place. They're not sort of split out into families. And so, the genus name is not relevant because what are they asking about? They're asking about families. So that would suggest that these dogs and cats are all mixed up. So realistically, what we'd expect is if there were 3 families, there were separate families, we'd expect it to be all the whalefish on one branch, we'd expect all the tape tails to be on another branch, and we'd expect all the big noses. Somebody was clearly a fan of Monty Python, on another branch, but that's not what we've got. We've got them all over the place. So if they were in different families, hypothesis 1, that's what we'd expect. What we've got is something different types of fish grouped together, and so that suggests that it's hypothesis 2, and we need to then give a Y for that, but it does support hypothesis 2. And then on to the sort of future, we sort of weigh up our evidence. So our evidence, we've got sort of 3 bits of supporting stuff for hypothesis 2. So all of evidence 2 points to hypothesis 2, and half of the evidence from the sort of morphology and feeding habits and where they're found and sizes and all the rest of it seem to support hypothesis 2. So I'm going to go for hypothesis 2 as my most likely, and I need to say why I've chosen that, and then perhaps comment on this feeding evidence. It might just be that, you know, different stages, because the morphology is pretty much what we used to sort stuff out on. Could be to avoid competition, just like tadpoles and frogs feed on different things. Given that, especially that it's nutrient poor. And how might it change? Well, if we had more specimens, then that would be better, wouldn't it? But we can't say, oh, we could do some DNA evidence, because it tells you here that this is from RNA evidence, you know, and that's just as good, isn't it, really? It's still looking at base pairings. So then you just have to sort of put it together into a sensible essay. And this was when I was marking them, what I think I noticed most, that you weren't making a point explaining it and then saying which hypothesis it supported. Now there are other ways of tackling, just before we move on to that, other ways of tackling the evidence. So, for example, you could have, instead of going evidence 1, evidence 2, you could have gone hypothesis 1, considered all the evidence, said which bits are supported by which bits of evidence, hypothesis 2, which bits of evidence, and then come to your conclusion. Either of those approaches, you would have been making the same points and explaining them, and then saying why it supported it. So let's just do that sort of make a point, explain. So let's just go for, what's a nice easy one? Well, let's go for feeding. So if I was wording this, I'd say the feeding evidence shows that all the 3 types of fish, so all 3 types have different feeding habits. So they're eating different things, large prey, so they all consume, what does it mean, different foods, and have different sized jaws. So why not use the word morphological? These morphological differences, so it's in the question stem, suggest that hypothesis 2 is correct. Sorry, hypothesis 1 is correct. If they were in the same family, we would expect them to be similar. So, here we go. Point, different feeding habits. Explanation. And then, here we go, evaluation. So, what does this tell you? P on your paper. Make a point, explain it properly, and then evaluate it. So with the gender evidence, it tells you that all of the whalefish are female, all the big-nosed fish are male, all the tape tails are juvenile. This suggests that they're one family, with 3 different morphological forms depending on their age. This suggests that they're from the same family. Depth evidence. The tape tails, the juveniles are all caught at the top, the adults are underneath. That suggests that they're the same family, different developmental stages. This supports hypothesis 2. So whenever you're writing an essay, sure, in your plan make your points, but then make sure that in your essay you explain each point and then evaluate it. Okay, I can say no more.